The crack of her palm against my face echoed louder than the thunder rolling over the Blue Ridge that Thanksgiving evening. Before I could steady myself, her spit landed warm on my cheek, sliding down the same jawline my late wife June used to cup with both hands when she told me everything would be all right. My own son sat frozen across the table, a forkful of smoked turkey suspended in midair like a man caught between two sinking boats. Vanessa turned to him, eyes blazing, and said the words that changed everything. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that June had left me something far more powerful than anger. She left me the truth, bound in leather, hidden where only a carpenter would think to look. I need to take you back a few hours. Before the thunder, before the slap, because every crack in a beam starts with a fracture you could have caught if you knew where to look. I spent that morning polishing the silverware June picked out the year we married. We were 23, broke as church mice, and stubborn enough to believe good forks could hold a family together. 48 years later, those forks still carried the scratches of every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every Sunday supper she insisted on, even when nobody felt like sitting down. The turkey had been smoking since dawn. June's recipe, written in her slanted hand on an index card taped inside the pantry door. Applewood chips, brown sugar rub, a splash of bourbon she would wink about when the pastor came to dinner. The scent filled the house and settled into the curtains and the walls I had raised with my own hands the summer we moved to Asheville. I built this home on a slope of the Blue Ridge where morning fog rolls through the valley like a slow breath. The radio hummed a bluegrass station June had programmed years ago. I never changed it. Some frequencies you leave alone because the silence between songs still sounds like the person who chose them. I set 4 places at the table. Candles. Roses from the garden. I stepped back and checked for gaps the way I check a finished joint in the shop, looking for anything out of true. Danny arrived first. He loosened his tie and glanced at his phone before pocketing it. He looked thinner, the skin around his eyes bruised with the tiredness that comes from pretending everything is fine. "Smells incredible, Dad," he said. "Just like Mom's." Vanessa came through the door next, heels clicking on the hardwood I sanded the summer Lily was born. She wore a smile that sat on her lips like varnish over unseasoned wood, bright on the surface, no grip underneath. She glanced at the roses, and her mouth tightened. Roses again. "They make this place feel like a wake. They were June's favorite," I said. "Of course they were." Then Lily burst in and threw herself at my legs. Her laugh rang through the room like a bell struck clean. I knelt and caught her, and she pressed her face into my neck. "Grandpa, I put you at the top of my family tree at school because you built our house." My chest went warm. "That is right, sweetheart. Every branch needs roots." We sat down, and for a few blessed minutes, the clinking of forks filled the silence. Lily told me about her art project. Danny complimented the turkey. Vanessa ate steadily, her knife precise. Then the fracture opened. "Some branches get old and start taking up space," Vanessa said. Her tone light, but her eyes trained on me like a level finding the bubble off center. Danny shifted. "Vanessa, come on." She ignored him. "You have had a good run, Robert. Most people your age find a nice community. Shuffleboard. Bingo nights." Her smile had edges. "This is my home, Vanessa." She laughed softly. "Technically it is Danny's. We have talked about this. Haven't we, honey?" Danny stared at his plate as if it could rescue him. The clock June bought at a yard sale ticked from the hallway. She used to say that sound keeps us grounded. Tonight, it only counted down. Then Vanessa told me she had signed a letter of intent to sell my workshop to a developer who wanted condominiums on the lot. She spoke like she was reading weather, calm, factual, decided. The air left the room. "You cannot sell what is not yours," I said. That was when she stood. Her hand came across my face, sharp and deliberate. Before I could draw breath, she leaned in and spat. The heat slid down my cheek onto the collar of the shirt June had ironed the last Thanksgiving she was alive. "You are just a carpenter," she said. "You do not get to decide anymore. Danny rose halfway, chair scraping the floor. "Vanessa, stop." But his voice cracked, and he sank back down like a man who practiced standing but never learned to stay upright. Lily slid from her chair and ran to me. She wrapped her arms around my waist and pressed her face against my ribs. "Do not go, Grandpa. Please." Her voice broke on the word, "please." I knelt and brushed the hair from her face. "You remember what I always tell you?" She nodded through tears. "Family means taking care of each other. That is right, sweetheart. Do not ever forget it." I took my coat from the chair. My hands trembled, not from rage but from the weight of what had just died in that room. At the door, I caught their reflections in the window glass. Danny with his head bowed, Vanessa standing victorious behind him, and Lily, small and shaking, arms still reaching for something that was already walking away. The night air bit the place where her palm had landed. Rain fell steady. Tapping the porch boards, I nailed down the autumn June, and I decided this house would outlast us both. One day I said without turning back, "You will understand what you have lost." I stepped into the dark. Behind me the clock's ticking grew faint, each beat falling away like a heartbeat learning to let go. The rain did not let up. It came at the windshield in sheets that turned the headlights into pale smears against the dark, and I drove through it with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, because some silences are better company than any song when the place on your face still burns from a hand that should never have been raised against you. Town lights thinned to ranch gates and fence posts. Then to nothing at all. Just the high country and a winter sky hidden somewhere behind the clouds. I knew every mile between that house and the cabin on the ridge. I knew which bends pooled water in November and which stretches of gravel turned to mud when the temperature dropped below 40. The road had carried me to celebrations and to funerals. Tonight, it carried me away. Not because I was lost, but because I needed distance to remember who I had been before someone decided I was worthless. The tires crunched onto the gravel turnoff, and the pines closed in overhead like the walls of a corridor built by something older than architecture. I rolled the window down an inch and let the rain-scented air push in. It smelled of resin and wet bark, and the particular cold that comes off mountain water when the season turns. June loved that smell. She said it was what the earth uses instead of perfume. The cabin appeared the way an old friend does at a station, plain and steady and impossible to mistake for anyone else. The porch still sagged at the far corner where a snowplow clipped it one spring, and I never got around to fixing it because June said the lean gave the place character. The lamp above the door still wore the little brass shade she found at a flea market in Hendersonville, and polished until it caught the morning like a second sunrise. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat in the hush that follows motion. It is the kind of quiet you feel on your skin. The same silence that lives in a workshop after the last tool has been put away and the sawdust has settled. I listened to the rain tap the roof of the truck and tried to separate the ache in my chest from the sting on my cheek. One was fresh. The other had been building for 2 years. Since the afternoon I stood in a hospital room and watched June close her eyes for the last time and take the warmth out of every room I would ever walk into again. I unlocked the cabin door, and the hinges complained in the same places they always have. A creak at the top, and a groan halfway through that June used to call the old man's welcome. Inside the air held the faint smell of cedar and dust, and beneath that something softer, something like her hand cream, the one with lavender on the label that she kept on the nightstand even after her hands stopped needing it. I did not turn on the overhead light. I used the small lamp by the armchair, the one we bought after our first winter here, when we realized the mountain evenings were longer and darker than anything we had known in the valley. The bulb threw a circle of honeyed light across the old rug and left the corners in shadow soft as velvet. The leather chair groaned under my weight, the way it always has, a sound so familiar it almost felt like being held. I sat there for a while, letting the cabin settle around me. Rain against the windows, whined through the pines, the distant call of something alive out in the wet dark that did not care about property deeds or kitchen table arguments. The quiet here was not empty. It was full of things June and I had put into these walls across 40 years of weekends and holidays and the kind of ordinary days that only become precious after they are gone. The safe was hidden in plain sight. I had built the bookshelf myself from white oak. I milled the autumn we moved in, and I set a panel on the second shelf so that a firm press on the right spot releases a latch behind the spines of a row of novels. June arranged by color instead of author, because she said a room should please the eye before it pleases the Rome. That's everyday mint. Even when my hands are steady, that panel takes 2 tries. Tonight, it clicked open on the first, as if the house had been waiting for me to come and ask. I knelt, spun the combination, and lifted the metal door. Cool air met my face, like a breath held too long, and finally released. The envelopes were where I had left them, rubber-banded and labeled in my block letters because June said my cursive looked like a spider having a tantrum. Deed. Tax. Insurance. Titles. I carried the stack to the armchair and sat down. I opened the first envelope with my thumbnail and spread the deed across my knees. The paper had the weight of something that matters. The kind of fiber that resists folding, that remembers every hand that has touched it. Names. Dates, parcel numbers, legal descriptions that wind on like dry creek beds. And there, right where it needed to be, my name. Not ours. Not theirs. Mine. I read it once, then again, as though the letters might rearrange themselves if I blinked. I traced my signature, the capital R leaning forward the way it always has. Impatient. June used to tease me that even my handwriting refused to stand still. The second envelope held certified copies, the clerk's embossed seals pebbled under my fingertips. The dates formed a chain reaching back through seasons I could still taste. Apple pies, cooling on the sill. Paint drying on baseboards while football murmured from the television. The soft drumming of Lily's first steps on these same boards. These pages did not argue. They did not humiliate. They told the truth in ink. And that was enough. I stacked them carefully, aligned the corners, and felt the tremor in my chest settle into something I recognized. A pulse that belonged to the man I had been before tonight tried to sand him down to sawdust. Beneath the envelopes, pressed against the bottom of the safe as though it had been tucked there as an afterthought, lay a leather-bound ledger, the color of dark honey. June's initials were stamped into the lower right corner in letters so small you would miss them unless you knew to look. I lifted it out, and the weight surprised me. Heavier than paper alone, as if she had pressed something of herself between the pages. I opened the cover. Her handwriting filled the first page, neat and slanted. The penmanship of a woman who believed words should stand up straight, even when the world leaned sideways. Dates ran down the left margin. Names I recognized. Dollar amounts. Notes in the shorthand she used for household accounts. But as I turned the pages, I realized this was not a record of groceries or utility bills. June had been documenting something else entirely across the last 2 years of her life. Something she had watched grow in this family the way rot grows inside a wall. Invisible until the structure begins to sag. At the back of the ledger, tucked against the inside cover, I found a small envelope held shut, with a ribbon that had once been the red of Christmas bows, but had faded to the color of old cherries. On the front, in June's hand, 4 words. Play this when quiet. Inside was a cassette tape. The old kind with the clear window that lets you see how much story is left on the spool. I turned it in my fingers, feeling the edges, the slight rattle of the reels inside. The lamp hummed. The rain whispered. The cabin held its breath around me like a workshop waiting for the first cut. The cassette player sat on the shelf beside June's paperbacks, the same machine she used to tape bluegrass songs off the radio on Saturday mornings while coffee brewed and light came through the window like something poured from a jar. I slid the tape in and pressed play. The mechanism caught, turned, and for a breath there was only the soft hiss of blank ribbon, the sound of time, remembering where it left off. Then her voice filled the room. It did something to the air that I cannot explain to anyone who has not lost the person whose voice was the last thing they heard before sleep. Time ruins some sounds, stretches them thin or buries them under newer noise, until you cannot tell whether what you remember is the voice itself or just your memory wearing down like a finish on a well-used table. But time had been kind to hers. It came through warm and steady, threaded with the smile I could see as surely as if she stood at the sink, drying a bowl with the cotton towel she refused to replace. "Hi, Bobby," she said. "If you are listening to this, it means someone has tried to sand you down to nothing. But you and I both know that good wood does not break. It bends, and then it holds." I closed my eyes and pictured the day she recorded it. Hair pulled back with a pencil, glasses sliding down her nose. She would have sat at this table with the recorder between the sugar bowl and the napkins she kept meaning to fold. "The ledger has everything you need," she continued. "Every number, every name, every trail that proves what is yours. But promise me something. Do not let anger be your saw. Bobby, use truth instead. It cuts cleaner. And it does not leave splinters in your hands." A pause, then quieter. "I have watched what is happening in our house. I wrote it all down, because proof matters more than shouting. She has been working on Danny for months. She wants the workshop, the land, the accounts. She tried to get me to sign papers while I was too tired from treatment to read the fine print. I signed her copies, but I kept the real ones. Do not burn the house to kill the termites. Just show them where the foundation is, and let the truth hold the weight." A soft click. No lecture. No instructions. Just June being June, 10 steps ahead of the living with her hand still on my shoulder from the other side of whatever wall separates the people we have lost from the air we keep breathing without them. I sat in the quiet and let her words settle the way sawdust settles after a long day at the bench, slowly, finding every surface. The lamp made its pool of gold on the rug. The rain had softened to a murmur. An owl called once outside and did not repeat itself. I thought of the winter we ran out of firewood in a storm that buried everything under 2 feet of snow. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles down a road that had disappeared. June found an old shipping pallet in the lean-to and came through the door with a crowbar in one hand and a grin that dared the cold to argue. She swung that bar like a woman who had waited her whole life for permission to destroy something useless, and the stove ate the scraps and the room came back to life. We sat laughing while the windows turned to steam. She never mistook gentleness for weakness. She never confused silence with surrender. I opened the ledger to the pages I had not yet read. June's handwriting marched down the margins, dates when Vanessa accessed the joint accounts. A copy of the letter of intent, drafted without my knowledge. A note about the afternoon Vanessa brought power of attorney forms to June's bedside during her 3rd round of chemotherapy. June could barely hold a pen, but still recognized a trap dressed as paperwork. She signed the copies Vanessa placed in front of her, smiled, waited until Vanessa left the room, then slipped the originals into the ledger. Beside the entry she had written in red ink a single line that made me set my jaw hard enough to hear my teeth. She brought these while I was hooked to the drip. She waited until Bobby went to the cafeteria. I closed the ledger and pressed my palms flat against the cover. The anger came then, not the sharp kind that makes a man swing, but the slow kind that heats from underneath like coals in a forge, the kind that welds instead of scorches. Vanessa had not only struck me in my own home. She had tried to strip a dying woman of her rights, while medicine burned through her veins. But June's voice was still in the room. Patient the way good teachers are patient when the lesson is hard. Do not let anger be your saw. I heard it as clearly as if the tape were still turning. I leaned back and let the leather hold me. The cabin clock ticked beneath the silence, like a pulse under floorboards. Outside, the rain had stopped, and what replaced it was the honest kind of quiet, clean, free of the performance that had poisoned the dinner table. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness. Too early for that. But something with a straight back. A settling. The feeling you get when the last joint slides into place without force after a day of measuring and cutting. I was not thinking about punishment. I was thinking about restoring the balance of a house built on respect, about placing weight back where it belonged. I set the ledger on the table beside the lamp where I would find it in the morning. The cassette on top, its faded ribbon catching the amber light like a small flag, marking the place where the story changed direction. "This is not revenge," I said to the empty room, and my voice sounded steadier than it had any right to. "This is restoration." I turned out the lamp. The pines moved outside in the wind, and the sound was low and unhurried, the way June hummed when she was planning something nobody else could see. My last thought before sleep was not about Vanessa or Danny or the sting still living on my cheek. It was about a young woman I had not considered in years, standing in the doorway of my workshop with a portfolio too big for her arms and a hunger in her eyes that I had mistaken for ambition when maybe it had always been something else entirely. Morning came thin through the cabin windows, the kind of light that has not yet decided whether it belongs to the day or is still borrowing from the night. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee gone cold and the ledger open in front of me, but I was not reading. I was looking past the pages to a morning 12 years earlier, when the workshop door was propped open with a cinder block, and a young woman stood on the threshold holding a portfolio case that was wider than her shoulders. She could not have been more than 24. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that was already losing the fight with gravity, and she wore a thrift store blazer with sleeves that did not quite reach her wrists. She had called the day before, asked if we were taking apprentices, and I had said we were not, because the truth was, I had stopped taking them 2 years earlier when my back started arguing with the lathe. But June was in the room when I hung up, and she gave me the look she reserved for moments when I was about to make a decision she would quietly reverse. "Give her an hour, Bobby," she said. "That is all I am asking." Vanessa arrived 10 minutes early and waited outside, because she thought arriving on time meant she was late. I watched her through the window. She studied the grain of the door frame while she waited, ran her thumb along the joint where the casing met the header, and I saw her lips move as though she were talking to the wood or maybe asking it a question. When I opened the door, she nearly dropped the portfolio. She showed me her drawings. They were rough, unfinished in places, but there was something in the lines that I recognized. An instinct for how spaces breathe, how light enters a room and changes the temperature of the air. June saw it first. She came into the shop that afternoon, stood behind Vanessa while she sanded a sample board, and watched her hands for a full minute before turning to me. "That girl sees grain the way you do," she said. "Do not let her go. I hired her. She started at 7 each morning and rarely left before dark. She swept the shop floor, sharpened the chisels, organized the lumber rack by species and cut date. When I gave her a piece of walnut and told her to make something, she spent 3 days on a small box with dovetail joints so tight you could not see the seams. She brought it to June, not to me, and June set it on the kitchen windowsill where it stayed for years catching the afternoon light. There was a hunger in Vanessa that I understood because I had carried a version of it myself at her age. Part ambition, part fear. The ambition I could work with. The fear I did not know how to reach. She never talked about where she came from. When June asked about her family, Vanessa changed the subject with a skill that suggested years of practice. She would talk about wood, about design, about the way a well-built chair can make a person feel held without being confined. But the moment the conversation turned toward anything personal, a wall came up so fast you could almost hear the nails going in. June made it her quiet mission to feed the right side of that hunger. She took Vanessa shopping for proper work boots and a winter coat that fit. She helped her write applications for a certificate program in Raleigh and drove her to the interview when Vanessa's car would not start. She taught her how to hold her ground in front of clients without raising her voice. "Confidence is not arrogance," she told her once during a project review. "It is just honesty about what your hands can do." I remember watching them through the glass wall of the shop, June leaning over Vanessa's shoulder, both of them laughing at something I could not hear. There was a softness in Vanessa then, a kind of gratitude she did not know how to name except through work. She brought us coffee every morning, even learned how June liked hers, too much sugar, and a splash of cream. After 2 years, Vanessa told us she had been accepted into the certificate program. She promised she would come back someday and open her own studio. June hugged her at the farewell lunch the way she hugged people she intended to keep, with both arms and no hurry. "You will make us proud," she said. Vanessa's eyes were wet when she walked to her car, and she waved once before the road took her. But life does not keep people the way you remember them. Years passed. June got sick. The world shrank to hospital rooms and medication schedules, and the slow, terrible arithmetic of watching someone you love become less of themselves each week. Danny buried himself in work, and I buried myself in the shop, because sawdust does not ask you how you are feeling, and the rhythm of a hand plane is the closest thing I know to prayer. 6 months after June died, Vanessa called. Her voice was sweet, but rehearsed. She called me Mr. Callahan, though she had called me Bobby for 2 years. She said she was developing a real estate project that would change the face of downtown Asheville. She had blueprints and renderings, and the kind of confidence that now looked theatrical where it had once looked earned. I was lonely. The house was too large and too quiet. Vanessa visited with her glossy presentation, and for a few hours, I forgot the ache in my chest. She talked about sustainable design and how June had inspired her sense of human architecture. It was flattery wrapped in vision, and I let it warm me, because the alternative was another evening in an empty kitchen listening to a clock count seconds that no longer mattered. When she asked for $150,000, temporary funding until investor paperwork cleared, I did not think twice. I wrote the check that night. She hugged me at the door, her arms tight, her voice bright. "You will not regret this, Bobby," she said. "I will make you proud." For months I believed her. She sent updates that promised returns which never arrived. Then, she stopped answering calls. The office number disconnected. A year later, I saw her name on Danny's phone when he came for Sunday dinner. The contact read Vanessa Price. But the voice on the other end now called me Dad. When Danny introduced her as his fiancée, the air in the room shifted the way air shifts before a storm, when the pressure drops, but the sky has not yet decided what it means to do. I recognized calculated charm when I saw it, but I wanted to believe she had changed because June always said, "People grow if you give them room." I gave Vanessa room. I gave her forgiveness for the loan she never repaid. I gave her the same trust June had once offered. In return, she gave me distance, then disdain, and finally a palm across my face on a Thanksgiving evening. The coffee had gone cold enough to taste like regret. I closed the ledger and stood. Outside the window, the Blue Ridge held the morning mist, the way a shelf holds books, steady and without complaint. I could not yet see the full shape of what Vanessa had become, or the full story of what had made her. But I knew the next step required more than memory, and a dead woman's voice on a cassette tape. It required a man named Harold Finch, a stack of documents, and the kind of patience that does not flinch when the truth turns out to be uglier than the lie. The morning sharpened into the kind of blue that only mountain country knows how to make, brittle and clean, as though the sky had spent the night rinsing itself of everything uncertain. I locked the cabin, placed the ledger on the passenger seat beside the stack of envelopes, and drove down through the pines toward town. The road was still damp from last night's rain, and the tires hissed softly against the blacktop. Hayfields glazed with frost stretched on both sides, and a pair of mule deer stood at a ditch, lifting their heads as I passed with the calm indifference of animals that have never been lied to. Harold Finch's office sits above the bookshop his father opened in 1952. Harold inherited the building and the sign, but not the inventory, and he has not sold a book in 20 years. He keeps the sign because he says a town that forgets where it bought its first stories is a town that has already started dying. I have known him since June, and I moved to Asheville, back when we were both young enough to believe we could build something permanent and old enough to suspect the world had other plans. The stairs creaked in the same 3 places they have always creaked. His door was open the way it always is, because Harold trusts daylight more than lamps and law more than theater. He sat behind a desk buried under forms and folders, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on the end of his nose, and he looked up when my shadow crossed the threshold. "Bobby," he said, with a smile that did not waste itself on teeth. "You look like a man who has run out of excuses." I took the chair by the window. The street below was waking slowly. A delivery truck idled at the curb. A boy on a bicycle cut through the crosswalk without looking. An early walker tugged a dog toward the lamppost. The town moved at the pace of people who still trusted mornings, and I envied every one of them. I placed the envelopes on his desk, and he pulled on his reading glasses the way a mason puts on gloves, with the practiced ease of a man about to handle something that matters. We did not exchange pleasantries. After 4 decades of friendship, you can skip that part without losing anything. He went through the deed first, then the tax receipts, then the certified copies with the clerk's raised seal. His finger paused over my signature and the filing date. He turned a page, checked a number, turned another. The room was quiet except for the sound of paper and the ticking of a clock on his bookshelf that he claimed kept better time than any judge he had ever appeared before. "It is clean," he said finally. "You are the sole legal owner of the residence, the workshop, and the vehicles. No transfers recorded, no liens. You did not authorize." He set the papers down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Whatever story they have been telling themselves, the paper does not tell it." Something uncoiled in my chest. Not triumph. Alignment. The feeling a carpenter gets when a long board drops into the guides and the saw finds the line without being forced. I do not want to fight in court, Harold. I do not want headlines or spectacle. I want the truth to stand up without me shouting for it. He leaned back and laced his fingers over his stomach and studied me the way he studies a paragraph in a statute that is trying to say 2 things at once. "Then you will need patience," he said, "and clean hands. You have both." I told him what I intended. Not punishment, but restoration. He did not write that down, but I saw it register behind his eyes. He pulled a legal pad toward him and drew 3 boxes with a pencil that needed sharpening. He labeled them in his neat block letters. Housing, vehicles, accounts. Under housing, he wrote notice of occupancy and keys. "You changed the locks yet?" he asked. "Not yet. We will not start with locks," he said. "We start with notices. Formal, polite, correct. We inform them the property owner intends to inspect on a specific date and time. No threats, just presence." Paper has a way of rearranging posture. Under vehicles, he wrote title reissue and insurance update. "You notify the Department of Motor Vehicles that you are assuming full control of the titles," he said, "and update the insurance to remove unauthorized drivers. No tow trucks in the middle of the night unless they force your hand. Make it boring." He looked up, and the faintest edge of a smile crossed his face. "Boring is devastating." Under accounts, he paused. "You still have joint accounts," he said. "A few. From when June handled the household bills. I never closed them. Then we closed the door. They have been using to heat their house with your firewood," he said. "You are the primary holder. You can freeze or restrict, without explanation. Be courteous. To the bank. It is not their drama." He looked at the 3 boxes as though they were a floor plan for a house he was designing in his head. "No lawsuits," he said. "No countersuits. If they file something frivolous, we answer. With documents. If they make noise, we do not. Silence unsettles people who are used to winning with volume." I watched the pencil move across the pad. The simple machinery of order at work, and then I asked the question that had been sitting on a ridge in my throat since I opened Lily's arms from around my waist the night before. "And Lily," I said. Harold set the pencil down. His face changed the way a landscape changes when a cloud moves over it. The same features, but a different weight. "Document everything that pertains to her welfare," he said. "Dates, times, comments made in her presence. If there is evidence you have not told me about, bring it when you are ready. For now, do nothing that could be called retaliation. Courts like the steady parent. Steady. The word fit, better than strong. Strong is what you need to swing a hammer. Steady is what you need to hold a level while the bubble finds center. He tore the sheet from the pad and slid it across the desk. His handwriting formed a column of quiet instructions, each one a small act of order in a life that had been turned sideways. "This is a week's worth of work," he said. "You do this right, and you will not have to raise your voice." I folded the page and tucked it into my coat pocket, feeling the paper settle against my chest like a second heartbeat. For the first time since the dinner table split open beneath my feet, I felt the floor hold. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose the way he does when the conversation is about to become personal. "Bobby," he said, "you understand there will be fallout. They will flail. They will try to turn embarrassment into outrage. They will bait you." "I will not bite," I said. He studied me for another beat, then stood and offered his hand. "Go be the man June married," he said. He knew how to let the truth do his speaking. I took his hand and held it a moment longer than courtesy required. Because some friendships carry weight that words cannot measure, and the grip of a man who believes in you is worth more than any document in a safe. Back on the street, the day had settled into its full brightness. The kind of clear November morning that makes you believe the world is more honest than it actually is. I walked 2 doors down to the bank, nodded to the teller who used to ask June about her garden, and asked to speak with the branch manager. The branch manager's name was Margaret Upton, and she wore the kind of smile that banked on politeness to cover discomfort. I had known her for 11 years, ever since June opened the joint savings account to set aside money for the workshop expansion. Margaret had sent flowers when June passed. She had signed the condolence card in green ink, a detail I remembered because June would have called it gaudy. "Mr. Callahan," she said, standing behind her glass desk as though it were a shield. "Please, sit down." I placed Harold's folder on the edge of her desk and took the chair opposite. The office smelled of carpet cleaner and spearmint gum. A framed photo of Margaret's twin daughters sat next to her monitor, both girls grinning on a ski slope somewhere bright and cold. I wondered if they still called her on Sundays. "I need to review all accounts held in my name," I said. "Joint accounts, savings, anything tied to this Social Security number." Margaret typed slowly. Her nails clicked on the keyboard like a metronome, set too cautious. After a minute, she turned the monitor slightly toward me, and I saw numbers arranged in rows I did not expect. The joint savings account June and I had opened in 2011 showed a balance of $412. When June died, it held just over $61,000. I asked Margaret to print the transaction history. She hesitated, glanced at the folder, then pressed print. 3 pages came out of the machine behind her. I read them the way a carpenter reads a warped board, slowly, turning each line to catch where the grain had shifted. Withdrawals had started 11 months after June's funeral. Small ones first, 200 here, 350 there. Gas stations, grocery stores, online retailers, then larger ones. A $1,500 wire to an address I did not recognize. A $4,000 cash withdrawal on a Tuesday in March. By August of the following year, the savings had been hollowed out like a log eaten from the inside by termites, the bark still standing, but nothing left to hold. I set the pages on my knee. Margaret watched me the way people watch a man they expect to shout. I did not shout. I asked her to print the checking account history as well. This one was worse. The checking account, which I used mainly for property taxes and insurance, had been converted to a joint account 14 months ago. The second name on it was Vanessa Callahan. I had never signed any conversion form. Margaret confirmed that the request had been submitted online, with digital signatures. "I did not authorize this," I said. Margaret folded her hands. "Mr. Callahan, we can open a formal dispute. I'll need you to fill out an affidavit, and we can freeze the account pending investigation." "Freeze it today," I said. She nodded, pulled a form from a drawer, and slid it across the desk. I filled it out in June's favorite pen, The one with the rosewood barrel I kept in my shirt pocket. My handwriting was steady. I made sure of that. While Margaret processed the freeze, I read the checking account pages. Vanessa had been methodical. She paid the electric bill, the water bill, the property insurance, all from my account, which on paper made it look as though she were maintaining the household responsibly. But between those dutiful payments were transfers to a second account I had never seen. One held solely in her name at a different bank. The transfers were round numbers. 1,000, 2,000, 1,500. They appeared every 2 weeks with the regularity of a paycheck, except no one was working for them. I added the figures in my head the way my father taught me to tally lumber, board by board, no calculator, no shortcuts. The total came to just under $43,000 across 14 months. $43,000 moved quietly from my checking account to hers, dressed up between electric bills and water payments, so no single month looked suspicious. Margaret returned with the freeze confirmation. I signed it, took my copy, and asked her one more question. The savings account withdrawals before the checking conversion, did those require a physical signature? She looked at her screen. Several of the larger ones were processed at the counter. They would have required an ID and a signature. Whose signature is on file? Margaret clicked twice. Her face did something complicated, a small contraction around the eyes, the kind of movement people make when they realize the floor they are standing on is not as solid as they thought. The signature on the withdrawal slips matches the secondary account holder at the time, which was... She paused. Your son, Daniel Callahan. I sat with that for a moment. The spearmint smell in the office grew sharper, almost medicinal. My son had walked into this bank, shown his ID, signed his name, and emptied the account his mother had built dollar by patient dollar over the last decade of her life. Danny had done this not once but multiple times. Each visit a small betrayal stacked on the last like shingles on a roof, designed to keep the rain out. But instead, letting everything rot underneath. I placed the pages into Harold's folder, aligned the edges, and closed it. Margaret offered me water. I declined. She said she was sorry. I thanked her and meant it. Because Margaret had not taken anything from me. She had only shown me what was already gone. Outside, the sidewalk was cold, and the sun had climbed above the ridge, throwing long shadows down Lexington Avenue. I stood for a moment, the folder under my arm, and watched a woman across the street arrange pumpkins on a wooden stand. She stacked them largest to smallest, the way June used to organize her canning jars, tallest in the back, shortest in the front, everything in its place. I walked to my truck, set the folder on the passenger seat, and opened the action sheet Harold had given me. I crossed out the first box with a single pencil line. 1 down, 2 remaining. The engine turned over on the first try. I pulled onto the road heading toward the DMV office on Tunnel Road, 14 minutes east, where the second box waited in a building that smelled of floor wax and resignation. The DMV on Tunnel Road sat between a mattress outlet and a Chinese buffet that had been closed since the pandemic. The parking lot was cracked down the middle, a long, jagged line running from the handicap spaces to the dumpster like a river on a map no one had bothered to update. I parked the truck, took Harold's folder from the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with the engine off. The action sheet listed 3 vehicles. The 2014 Ford F-150 I was sitting in. The 2009 Honda Accord June had driven until the chemo made her hands shake too much to grip the wheel, and the 1987 Chevrolet C10 I had restored over 2 winters in the workshop, replacing the bed panels with hand-sanded white oak because June said a truck should feel like furniture. All 3 were titled in my name. Harold had verified this the day before. The task today was simple: confirm current registration status, update insurance records, and ensure no liens or transfer requests had been filed without my knowledge. Inside, the building smelled exactly as I expected: floor wax and resignation, with an undertone of burned coffee from a machine in the corner that no one trusted but everyone used. I took a number, 63. The digital display read 47. I sat in a plastic chair bolted to a metal rail and opened the folder on my lap. While I waited, I reviewed June's ledger again. She had kept a section near the back labeled V Notes, written in her careful slanted hand. Most entries were short. V asked about the truck title today. Told her it's Bobby's. Another. V mentioned selling the Accord. I said we'll keep it for Lily when she's old enough. A third, dated just 5 weeks before June died. V brought papers for Bobby to sign. I read them first. Power of attorney. I hid them in the ledger. Bobby must never sign these. I turned the page. Stapled to the inside back cover was a single sheet of legal paper. A pre-filled power of attorney form granting Vanessa Callahan broad authority over Robert J. Callahan's financial and property decisions. June had written across it in red ink. Do not sign. Show Harold. My number was called. I closed the ledger and walked to the counter. The clerk was a young man with a beard trimmed too precisely and a lanyard that read Travis. He typed my information, pulled up the vehicle records, and confirmed what Harold had already told me. All 3 vehicles were registered to Robert James Callahan, current address on Chestnut Ridge Road, Asheville. No liens. No pending transfers. Then Travis paused. He squinted at the screen, clicked twice, and tilted his head the way a dog does when it hears a frequency, just outside its understanding. Sir, there's a note here. Someone submitted an online request to transfer the title of the 2009 Honda Accord to a Vanessa Callahan approximately 6 weeks ago. It was flagged and rejected because the digital signature didn't match the one on file. Rejected, I repeated. Yes, sir. The system caught it. The signature was close but not identical. Whoever submitted it used a slightly different middle initial. The request is still in the rejected queue. No action was taken. I asked Travis to print the rejected request. He did. I placed it in the folder next to the power of attorney June had intercepted. 2 attempts. 2 failures. One caught by a dead woman's vigilance, the other by a government computer that noticed a single wrong letter. The margin between losing everything and keeping it was that thin. 1 letter. One wife, who read documents before her husband, could reach for a pen. Travis asked if I wanted to add any security flags to my accounts. I said yes. He walked me through the process. A verbal password required for any future title changes, a secondary ID verification, and an automatic alert sent to my phone if any modification was requested. I chose the verbal password carefully. I used the word restoration. Travis typed it in without asking why. Outside, the parking lot had filled up. A woman was loading a car seat into a minivan 3 spaces from my truck, struggling with the buckle, while a toddler screamed in her arms. I watched her for a moment, not because I wanted to stare, but because the scene reminded me of Danny at that age, how he used to fight the car seat like it was a trap, kicking and arching his back until June would lean in close and whisper something I could never hear, and he would go still, eyes wide, and let her buckle him in. I never learned what she whispered. I asked her once, and she said, "That's between me and the boy." She smiled when she said it. The kind of smile that held a secret she enjoyed keeping. I got into the truck and crossed out the second box on Harold's sheet. 2 down. 1 remaining. The third box was the house. Harold had written it in block letters. Formal notice of occupancy. Hand. Deliver. Witness. Present. Do not engage in argument. Beneath it, in smaller script, this is the one that will make noise. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was 11:42 in the morning. Vanessa would be at the house. Danny would be at the construction site where he supervised framing crews, a job I had arranged for him 3 years ago through a contractor who owed me a favor for building his daughter's nursery. Lily would be at school, safe behind a desk covered in crayon drawings and multiplication tables. I started the engine. The road back to Chestnut Ridge was 22 minutes through the valley. Past the orchard, where June and I had picked apples every October. Past the stone church where Pastor Tom still preached sermons that ran 15 minutes too long. Past the bend where the creek crossed under the road, and the guardrail had never been repaired since the flood of 2019. I did not drive to Chestnut Ridge. Not yet. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot of Darla May's Diner on Haywood Road, cut the engine, and sat with Harold's folder on the seat beside me. The third box could wait until tomorrow. Harold had said patience was the strongest timber, and I believed him, because every piece of wood I had ever ruined was one I had cut too soon. I went inside, ordered coffee and a biscuit, and sat by the window where June and I used to sit on Saturday mornings. The booth still had the same cracked vinyl, the same view of the hardware store across the street. I opened the ledger to the page with the power of attorney and read June's red ink warning one more time. Do not sign. Show Harold. Even gone. She was still building walls around me. I slept at the cabin again that night, the leather ledger on the nightstand beside a glass of water I never drank. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, and when I opened the door, the mountains looked scrubbed clean, every ridge sharp against a sky so blue it seemed painted by someone who had never learned restraint. June would have stood on the porch with her coffee and said, "Bobby, the Lord is showing off today." I said it for her, quietly, to no one, and the words felt right even in an empty room. Harold met me at the diner at 8. He wore the same brown corduroy jacket he had worn for every legal matter I could remember, the elbows patched with leather squares his wife had sewn on in 1996. He ordered eggs and toast and read through the formal notice one last time while I stirred coffee. I did not drink. "It's clean," he said. "States that you are the sole legal owner of the property at 41 Chestnut Ridge Road. States that all current occupants are residing without a lease agreement and at the owner's discretion. Requests a meeting within 14 days to discuss terms of continued occupancy or voluntary departure. No threats. No deadlines shorter than the law requires. Just facts stacked in a row." "Like bricks," I said. "Like bricks." Harold folded the paper into an envelope and handed it to me. "I'll be your witness. I'll stay in the truck, unless things go sideways. If she starts shouting, you hand her the envelope and walk away. Do not respond to anything she says. Your silence will be louder than any sentence you could build." We took my truck. Harold sat in the passenger seat with his briefcase on his lap, humming a hymn I half recognized. Something about rivers and steady ground. The drive to Chestnut Ridge took 22 minutes. I knew every curve, every mailbox, every driveway where the gravel had washed out and never been fixed. This was the road I had driven for 31 years, first with June beside me, then alone, then with the slow understanding that the house at the end of it was no longer mine in any way that mattered, even though my name was on every document that said it was. I parked at the curb rather than the driveway. Harold noted the time on his legal pad. 9:14 in the morning. Danny's work truck was gone. Vanessa's white SUV sat in the driveway, the one she had leased using a credit line I was almost certain she had opened with forged authorization. The front garden still held the mums June had planted the autumn before she got sick, now overgrown but alive, orange and stubborn against the November cold. I walked up the path I had laid myself 20 years ago. Bluestone pavers cut to fit the slope so rainwater would run to the garden beds instead of pooling at the door. I had measured each stone twice and cut once, the way my father taught me, and they had not shifted a quarter inch in 2 decades. My work held. It always held. I knocked. 3 times, evenly spaced. The way you knock when you are not angry, and not afraid, and not asking permission. Vanessa opened the door wearing a bathrobe and holding a mug that said "Best Mom" in gold letters. Her hair was pulled back. Without makeup, her face looked younger, closer to the girl who had walked into my workshop 12 years ago, with a portfolio too big for her arms. For 1/2 second I saw that girl, and something in my chest softened like pine in steam. Then her eyes dropped to the envelope in my hand, and the girl disappeared. "What is this?" she said. It was not a question. It was a wall. A formal notice regarding the property, I said. Please read it at your convenience. Harold Finch is in the truck, as witness to delivery. She looked past me at Harold, who raised one hand from the passenger window, a gesture so calm it could have been a wave between neighbors. Vanessa took the envelope. She did not open it. She held it the way someone holds a thing they already understand, loosely, as though the weight of it was not in the paper, but in what it meant. You think this changes anything? She said. Her voice was low, controlled, a voice I had not heard at the Thanksgiving table. This was the other Vanessa, the one who planned, who calculated, who moved money in round numbers and filed documents with forged signatures. Danny and I have been maintaining this house for 2 years. We pay the bills. We fix the roof. We are Lily's parents, and this is Lily's home. The bills were paid from my accounts, I said. The roof was contracted through Danny's employer, who invoiced me directly. And Lily's home is wherever Lily is safe and loved. I should not have said that last part. Harold had told me to say nothing beyond the delivery statement. But the words came out the way a drawer slides open when the joint is true, without effort, without friction, because they had been built to fit. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath, and spoke in a whisper so precise it felt rehearsed. If you take this house, I will make sure you never see Lily again. I will tell the court you are unstable. I will tell them about the nights you spent alone in that cabin, talking to a dead woman's cassette tape. I will make you look like a man who lost his mind when he lost his wife, and every judge in Buncombe County will believe me because I am the mother and you are just the grandfather. I held her gaze. The softened thing in my chest turned solid again. Not with anger, but with something closer to clarity. The moment when you hold a level against a beam and the bubble settles exactly in the center and you know the line is true. The notice is delivered, I said. Have a good morning, Vanessa. I turned and walked down the bluestone path. Behind me, I heard the envelope tear open. I did not look back. Harold was writing the time on his legal pad when I reached the truck. 9:19. 5 minutes. The whole thing had taken 5 minutes. I started the engine. Harold capped his pen and said, She threatened you with Lily. Yes. Expected, he said. He wrote something else on the pad. We document it. We prepare for it. And we do not react to it. He looked at me over his round-rimmed glasses. Bobby, the hardest board to plane is the one that fights you on every pass, but you don't throw it out. You adjust the blade and go slower. I pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Vanessa stood on the porch holding the torn envelope in one hand and her phone in the other, already dialing. I knew who she was calling. Danny would hear her version first. The version where I was the villain. The bitter old man trying to tear a family apart. And Danny, my son, would believe her. Because believing her was easier than remembering who he used to be. We drove in silence back toward town. The mountains were still sharp and blue and impossibly clean, and somewhere behind them the sun was climbing the way it always did, without asking anyone's permission. Danny came to the cabin that evening. I heard his truck before I saw it. The diesel rattle echoing off the water the way thunder does when it rolls across a valley with nowhere to go. He parked crooked, one tire on the gravel and one on the grass, and sat in the cab for a long time with the engine running. I watched him from the porch, a mug of decaf in my hand. The ledger closed on the table beside the rocking chair June had bought at an estate sale the summer Lily was born. When he finally stepped out, he looked the way lumber looks after it has been left in the rain too long, swollen in the wrong places, warped where it should have been straight. His boots were still dusty from the job site. His hard hat sat on the dashboard behind him like a yellow moon in a dirty sky. He walked toward the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and stopped at the bottom of the steps, 3 feet below me, which meant I was looking down at my son for the first time in years and hating every inch of the difference. You served Vanessa papers, he said. I delivered a notice of occupancy. It's not an eviction. It's a conversation starter. She's been crying all afternoon, Dad. I set the mug on the railing. Danny, sit down. He did not sit. He stood with his weight on his left foot, the way he always stood when he was deciding whether to stay or leave. A habit he had carried since he was 14, and I caught him smoking behind the workshop. June had handled that one. She sat him on the workbench and talked to him for an hour, while I pretended to sand a cabinet door 10 feet away. Whatever she said worked. He did not smoke again until college. I went to the bank yesterday, I said. I saw the withdrawal records. Your signature, Danny. Multiple times. You walked into that bank and took money from the account your mother built. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. He looked at the lake behind the cabin, where the last light was turning the surface into something between copper and rust. A heron stood in the shallows near the dock, perfectly still, waiting for a fish with the kind of patience that only hunger teaches. Vanessa said it was for the house, he said quietly. She said the insurance lapsed and we needed to cover it before the bank flagged the mortgage. She said you wouldn't notice because you weren't checking the statements. There is no mortgage, Danny. I paid off that house in 2008. Your mother and I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the last check together, and she cried because it was the first time in our lives we didn't owe anyone anything. You were there. You were 23 years old, and you opened a bottle of champagne that cost $11, and June said it tasted like freedom. Danny closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, but he did not let anything fall. He had learned that from me, the holding, the keeping things level when the floor was tilting. I wished he had not learned it. I wished he had learned instead to let the water come when it needed to. The way June did. Openly. Without apology. Because she understood that tears were not weakness but pressure finding its proper exit. She told me there was a mortgage, he said again, as though repeating it could make it true. And you believed her without calling me. Without checking a single document. Without asking. He sat down on the steps then. Not because I had invited him again, but because his legs made the decision for him. He put his elbows on his knees and stared at his boots, the steel toes scuffed from years of job sites I had helped him get. I built this boy. June and I built him together. Beam by beam, lesson by lesson, the way you build a house you expect to stand for 100 years. Somewhere along the way, a joint had failed, and I could not tell if it was his joint or mine. How much did she take? He asked. From the savings, roughly $60,000. From the checking, $43,000 in transfers, to an account in her name. She also attempted to transfer the title of your mother's accord and filed a forged power of attorney. Your mother intercepted the power of attorney before she died. The DMV rejected the title transfer because the signature was wrong by one letter. Danny's hands were shaking. He pressed them together between his knees the way a man prays when he has forgotten the words. I didn't know about the transfers, he said. I swear to you, Dad. I didn't know about any account in her name. But you knew about the withdrawals. You signed for them. He nodded. One small movement, heavy as a beam dropped from a height. We sat in silence for a while. The heron caught its fish, a quick silver flash, and flew low across the water toward the far bank where the pines grew thick and dark. The air smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney and the last wet leaves of November decomposing along the shore. What do you want me to do? Danny said. His voice was the voice of a boy, not a man. And it broke something in me that I did not know was still whole. I want you to tell the truth. When Harold files the formal dispute, when the court asks questions, I want you to say what happened. Not what Vanessa told you happened. What you did with your own hands. She'll leave me. Maybe. She'll take Lily. Not if the court sees who you really are. Not if you stand up straight. He looked at me then, fully. The way he used to look at me when he was small and had broken something and was waiting to see if I would be the father who fixed it or the father who punished. I tried to be neither. I tried to be the father who simply said the truth and let the boy decide what to do with it. Danny, I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because your mother spent the last 2 years of her life keeping records so that one day, if things went wrong, there would be a straight line back to the truth. She did that while she was sick, while the chemo was eating her from the inside and she could barely hold a pen. She did it for you, as much as for me. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The last light was gone now, and the porch lamp clicked on automatically, casting a circle of yellow that reached just far enough to hold both of us. I need to think, he said. Take all the time you need. But Danny, think with your own mind, not hers. He stood up, brushed the dust from his jeans, and walked back to his truck. He did not look at me again. The diesel rattled to life. The headlights swept across the water, and he pulled away slow, the gravel popping under his tires, like small things, breaking one at a time. I sat on the porch until the sound of his engine faded completely, and the only noise left was the lake lapping against the dock and the creak of June's rocking chair moving in a wind I could not feel. 5 days passed. I spent them the way a man spends time when he is waiting for a storm he can see on the horizon, but cannot hurry or slow. I worked. I went to the cabin workshop, a smaller version of the one on Chestnut Ridge, just a bench and a lathe and a wall of hand tools June had given me over 20 Christmases. I turned a set of walnut candlesticks for no reason other than to keep my hands honest. When your hands are shaping wood, your mind cannot shape worry. That is not philosophy. That is physics. Harold called on Monday. His voice had the careful weight of a man choosing each word the way a mason chooses each stone. Vanessa has retained counsel, he said. A firm out of Charlotte, Braddock, and Lyle. They specialize in property disputes and family law. They're not cheap, and they're not friendly. What does that mean for us? It means she's not bluffing and she's not folding. She intends to contest your ownership claim by arguing constructive abandonment. The theory is that you voluntarily left the residence, allowed her and Danny to maintain it, and created an implied tenancy that gives her legal standing to remain. I set the candlestick on the bench. Sawdust drifted to the floor like snow in a room with no wind. I left because she made it impossible to stay. I know that. But the court needs documentation, not feelings. We need to show that your departure was not voluntary relinquishment, but a response to hostile conditions. The Thanksgiving incident, the financial fraud, the forged documents. We build a timeline that proves you were pushed out, not walked out. I have all of that. You have most of it. What we don't have yet is a witness to the pattern of behavior inside the house before Thanksgiving. Someone who saw how she treated you, how the dynamic shifted after June's death. A neighbor, a friend, someone from church. I thought about that. The house on Chestnut Ridge sat on 2 acres, set back from the road, screened by the oaks June and I had planted when Danny was in elementary school. Neighbors were not close, but there was Darla May, who had delivered casseroles every Wednesday for 3 months after June's funeral, and who had once told me over coffee that she did not like the way Vanessa spoke to me in front of Lily. And there was Pastor Tom, who had visited the house twice in the year after June died, and who had pulled me aside after the second visit to say, gently, that something in the house felt different, that the warmth had gone out of it, like a fire someone had deliberately smothered. I'll talk to Darla May and Pastor Tom, I said. Good. Get written statements if you can. Signed and dated. I'll file our response to Braddock and Lyle by Wednesday. On Tuesday morning, I drove to Darla May's diner before the breakfast rush. She was behind the counter arranging pies in the glass case, her hands dusted with flour, her apron printed with cardinals, the North Carolina state bird that June had loved because it was the only bird stubborn enough to stay red all winter. I told her everything, not the legal details. Harold had advised me to keep those close, but the shape of it, the slap, the accounts, the forged papers, the notice, Vanessa's threat about Lily. Darla May listened the way she always listened, with her whole body still and her eyes fixed on mine. the kind of listening that makes you feel like the only voice in the room even when the coffee machine is hissing and the bell above the door keeps ringing. When I finished, she set down the pie server and said, "Bobby, I saw it coming. I didn't say enough, and I'm sorry for that. But I'll write you whatever you need. I saw her talk to you like you were hired help in your own kitchen. I saw her move June's photographs into the hallway closet 3 weeks after the funeral. I saw Lily come to the counter one Saturday morning and ask me if Grandpa was allowed to eat with them anymore because Mama said he had his own room now. That last detail landed in my chest like a nail driven without a pilot hole, splitting the grain in a place I thought was solid. Lily had come to the diner. Lily had asked that question, and I had not known. Darla May wrote her statement on diner stationery. 2 pages in a handwriting that was round and clear and unapologetic. She signed it, dated it, and handed it to me with a biscuit wrapped in wax paper. "You eat that before you go see Pastor Tom," she said. "You look like you've been feeding your worry and starving everything else." Pastor Tom was in his office at the stone church on Riverside Drive, the one with the stained glass window of the Good Shepherd that June had helped fundraise to restore. He sat behind a desk covered with sermon notes and a Bible held open by a coffee mug, and he listened the same way Darla May had listened, fully, without interruption, as though listening were itself a form of prayer. "I remember those visits," he said when I finished. "The second time I came, Vanessa answered the door and told me you were resting. But I could hear you in the workshop, the lathe running. A resting man does not run a lathe. I should have pushed past her. I didn't. And that's on me." He wrote his statement in the careful hand of a man who understands that words, once written, become permanent. He described the shift in the household after June's death. The isolation he observed. The controlled access to Robert. The removal of June's personal items from common spaces. He signed it and added his title beneath his name, as though the church itself were testifying. I drove back to the cabin with 2 statements on the passenger seat, a biscuit in my stomach, and a feeling I had not expected. Gratitude. Not for the evidence, though it mattered. Gratitude for the fact that people had seen. That I had not been invisible. That the things Vanessa had done in the quiet of that house had left marks on other people's memories. And those marks could now be read like the rings of a tree, each one recording a season of growth or damage. Harold called that evening. I told him about the statements. He was pleased, though Harold's version of pleased was a single good, followed by a long pause. "There's one more thing," he said. "Danny called me this afternoon." I sat down in the leather chair. The lamp hummed. The lake was dark outside the window. "He wants to give a deposition," Harold said. "He wants to tell the truth." I did not speak for a long time. The cabin held its silence around me, the way a good joint holds 2 boards. Invisible, firm, doing its work, without asking to be noticed. "When?" I said. "Friday, my office. 10 o'clock. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet. June's ledger lay on the nightstand where I had left it 5 days ago. Its leather cover worn smooth by her hands. I placed my hand on it and let it rest there. Not reading, not opening, just touching the surface the way you touch a wall you built yourself to make sure it is still standing. Friday came the way Fridays do when you have spent a week waiting for them. Slow at first and then all at once. Like the last inch of a candle burning faster than the rest. I woke at 5, dressed in the dark, and drove to town with the windows down, because the cold air kept my thoughts from drifting into places where they would not be useful. A carpenter does not think about the finished house while he is cutting the first board. He thinks about the cut. Harold's office smelled of old paper and lemon oil. He had cleared his desk, which I had never seen him do, and set out 3 chairs around a small table near the window. A court reporter named Sheila sat in the corner with her stenotype machine, a quiet woman with silver hair who nodded at me the way professionals nod, with just enough warmth to acknowledge that this was a human matter dressed in legal clothing. Danny arrived at 10:03. He wore a clean flannel shirt and boots that had been wiped but not polished, the effort of a man who wanted to show respect but did not know exactly how much was required. He shook Harold's hand and looked at me. I cannot describe what was in his face, because I have never found the right word for the expression a son wears when he is about to say things that will hurt his father and save him at the same time. Harold explained the procedure. Sworn deposition. Everything transcribed. May be entered as evidence. Danny declined to have his own attorney present. I don't need a lawyer to tell the truth, he said, and the sentence sat in the room like a stone placed on level ground. Harold began with simple questions. Name, date of birth, relationship, current address. Danny answered each one in the flat tone of a man reading measurements from a tape. Then Harold turned the page. When did Vanessa first ask you to withdraw money from your father's savings account? Danny looked at his hands resting on the table, palms down, the hands of a framer who spent his days holding things together. About 11 months after Mom died. She said there were bills, insurance premiums that had lapsed. She said Dad wasn't keeping up with the paperwork because of the grief, and if we didn't step in, the house could be at risk. Did you verify any of those claims? No. Why not? Because Vanessa handled the finances after Mom passed. She offered to take it over. I was working double shifts, and I thought Dad was falling apart. She said she would manage everything, and I let her because it was easier than looking at the numbers myself. Harold wrote something on his pad. How many times did you physically go to the bank? 7. Maybe 8. Over about 14 months. She would text me the morning of. The amount and the purpose. She always said it was urgent. Did you ever question the amounts? Danny closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was looking at the window behind Harold, where the rooftop of the bookshop was visible, its shingles warped and green with moss. The 4th time. Danny said. $4,000. Cash. She said a plumber found a problem with the main line. I drove past the house that afternoon. No plumber's truck. No hole in the yard. I asked her that night, and she said he had come early and already finished. Did you believe her? No. But I signed the next withdrawal 2 weeks later anyway. The room held that sentence the way a foundation holds weight, silently, completely. Sheila's fingers clicked and stopped. Harold let 10 seconds pass before continuing. Did you have knowledge of Vanessa opening a separate account and transferring funds from your father's checking account? Not until Dad told me at the cabin last week. The attempted title transfer of the Honda Accord? No. A power of attorney document prepared for your father's signature? Danny's voice cracked. No. Mom never told me about that. He pressed his palms harder against the table, as though trying to push something through the wood and into the floor. Mom was protecting Dad, and she didn't tell me because she knew I would have told Vanessa. That sentence landed in the room like a tree falling in a forest where everyone was listening. Harold stopped writing. I sat still and felt something inside me split open. Not with anger, but with a grief. So specific it had a texture, rough like end grain cut against the fiber. Impossible to sand smooth. My wife had kept secrets from our son to protect me. Because she loved us both and trusted only one of us. And that knowledge was a wound. No amount of truth could close entirely. Danny turned to me. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen it. I should have checked. I was her hands, and I didn't even know what I was building. I looked at my son. 35 years old. Broad shoulders. The same jaw as his mother. The same habit of pressing his lips together when trying not to cry. I had built furniture that lasted decades, porches that held through hurricanes, cabinets that fit so precisely you could not slide paper between the joints, but I could not build a sentence large enough to hold what I felt, so I said the smallest true thing I could find. I know, son. Harold asked 3 final questions. Would Danny testify in court, provide his own bank records, and sign an affidavit confirming Vanessa's role in directing the withdrawals? Danny said yes, to all 3. His voice was steady, the way a beam is steady after you bolt it to the frame, not because it cannot tremble, but because something is holding it in place. Sheila printed the transcript. Danny signed each page. Harold notarized the signatures with a brass seal that left a circular imprint in the paper, like a ring in a tree, marking where the growth changed direction. Danny stood. I put my hand on his shoulder. The left one. The one he always carried higher than the right from years of lifting lumber on that side. I squeezed once and let go. He walked down the stairs and across the street to his truck. Through the window, I watched him put his forehead against the steering wheel and stay like that. I turned away and let him have that. Because some things a man needs to do alone with the windows up and no one looking. Harold closed his legal pad. We file Monday. The hearing will be scheduled within 3 weeks. Buncombe County moves slow, but the evidence is clean. He looked at me over his glasses. Bobby, your son just handed you the case. I nodded. Outside, Danny's truck pulled away from the curb. The exhaust hung in the cold December air for a moment, then dissolved. The way all evidence of hard things eventually does if you give it enough sky. The Buncombe County Courthouse stood on a hill at the north end of Pack Square, a building made of granite and certainty. I had driven past it 1,000 times without ever going inside. June and I were married at the stone church, not the courthouse. And every legal matter we had ever faced, Harold handled from his office above the bookshop. But this morning I climbed the steps in a borrowed suit, Harold beside me with his briefcase and his corduroy jacket, and I entered a room where the truth would either hold or it would not, and no amount of sanding could fix it after. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. 2 tables facing a raised bench, an American flag in the corner, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just high enough to remind you that nothing in this room was natural. The judge's nameplate read, Honorable Catherine Voss. I did not know her. Harold said she was fair, thorough, and impatient with theatrics, which he considered ideal for our case. Vanessa sat at the opposite table with 2 attorneys from Braddock and Lyle, a man in a charcoal suit and a woman with a leather portfolio who never looked up from her notes. Vanessa wore a cream blouse and small earrings, her hair pinned back, her posture composed. She looked like a woman attending a board meeting, not a hearing that could strip away everything she had taken. She did not look at me. I did not need her to. Danny sat in the gallery behind me. He had come without being asked, wearing the same flannel from the deposition, pressed this time. Lily was not present. She was at school, drawing crayon pictures of houses and mountains, unaware that her family was being disassembled in a room that smelled of floor polish and old wood. Harold presented our case first. He was methodical the way a man is methodical when he has spent 40 years learning that the law rewards patience and punishes performance. He laid out the documents one by one. The original deed to 41 Chestnut Ridge Road, signed by Robert James Callahan, dated 1993. The property tax records, paid continuously by Robert James Callahan for 31 years. The vehicle titles. The insurance policies. Each document placed on the table like a plank in a floor, one after another, until the surface was complete and there was nowhere left to stand that was not mine. Then he presented the evidence of fraud. The bank statements showing the savings account drained from $61,000 to $412. The checking account converted to a joint account without my signature. The $43,000 in transfers to Vanessa's personal account. The rejected title transfer at the DMV. The power of attorney June had intercepted and marked in red ink Danny's sworn deposition confirming he had made withdrawals at Vanessa's direction. Harold read key passages from June's ledger aloud. Her handwriting projected on a small screen beside the bench, the slanted letters large enough for Judge Voss to read. V asked about the truck title today, told her it's Bobby's, and V brought papers for Bobby to sign. I read them first. Power of attorney. I hid them in the ledger. Bobby must never sign these. The courtroom was silent, as those words filled the air, the voice of a woman who had been dead for 2 years, speaking with a clarity that no living witness could match. Darla May's statement was entered into evidence. Pastor Tom's statement followed. Both described a pattern of isolation, control, and the systematic removal of Robert Callahan from his own household after the death of his wife. The Braddock and Lyle attorney in the charcoal suit stood and presented Vanessa's defense. Constructive abandonment. He argued that I had voluntarily left the residence, that Vanessa and Danny had maintained the property in my absence, that the financial arrangements were informal family agreements made during a period of grief. He spoke well. His sentences were polished, and his voice carried the steady confidence of a man who charges $400 an hour and believes every dollar is earned. Judge Voss listened without expression. When the attorney finished, she asked one question. Mr. Callahan voluntarily left the residence. Is that your position? Yes, Your Honor. And the bank withdrawals, the forged account conversion, the attempted vehicle transfer, and the intercepted power of attorney. These were all informal family arrangements? The attorney paused. It was a small pause, no more than 2 seconds. But in a courtroom, 2 seconds is an acre of silence. The financial matters are subject to interpretation, Your Honor. Family finances during bereavement are often handled informally. Judge Voss turned to Harold. Mr. Finch, does your client wish to make a statement? Harold looked at me. I stood. I had not prepared a speech. Harold had advised me to keep it short, factual, and free of emotion. I tried, but when I opened my mouth, the words that came out were not the ones I had planned. Because a courtroom is not a workshop, and you cannot always cut along the line you drew. Your Honor, my name is Robert Callahan. I am 68 years old. I am a carpenter. I built the house at 41 Chestnut Ridge Road with my own hands in 1993. My wife June and I raised our son there. She planted the garden. I laid the stone path. We paid off the mortgage together in 2008, and she cried that day because she said it was the first time we were free. June died 2 years ago. After she died, I was asked to leave my own home by people I loved and trusted. I did not leave voluntarily. I left because staying had become impossible. The documents in front of you are the truth my wife spent her last years preserving. I am asking this court to recognize what she already knew, that the house, the accounts, and the property are mine, and that they were taken through deception, not agreement. I sat down. The room was quiet. Judge Voss wrote something on her notepad, looked at both tables, and spoke. I have reviewed the submitted evidence. The deed, tax records, and vehicle titles clearly establish Mr. Callahan as sole legal owner. The evidence of unauthorized financial transactions is substantial and uncontested in its specifics. The constructive abandonment argument is not supported by the documented pattern of coercion and fraud. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. She paused. Full property rights are restored to Robert James Callahan. A separate hearing will be scheduled to address the financial restitution and any matters concerning the minor child. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down once. A single sound, clean and final, like the last nail driven into a frame that has finally found its square. Harold placed his hand on my arm. It's done, Bobby. Across the room, Vanessa stood motionless, her attorneys gathering papers around her. For one moment, her composure cracked. Just slightly, the way a veneer cracks when the wood beneath it swells with moisture it was never meant to hold. Then she straightened, picked up her purse, and walked out without a word. Danny was waiting in the hallway. He did not say anything. He just stood there with his hands at his sides. And when I walked through the door, he fell into step beside me the way he used to when he was small, and we walked to the workshop together on Saturday mornings, his short legs matching my long ones, neither of us speaking because the walk itself was enough. We stepped outside into the December sun. The granite steps were cold under my shoes. The mountains beyond the square were sharp and blue, and somewhere in those ridges the cabin waited with June's ledger on the nightstand and the rocking chair on the porch, and a silence that no longer felt like emptiness, but like the space inside a house after the last wall has been raised, and before the first piece of furniture is moved. In, a silence full of possibility. I did not go back to the house that day. I went to the cabin, sat on the porch with the ledger in my lap, and watched the lake turn from silver to black as the sun dropped behind the ridge. Harold had said the ruling gave me the legal right to re-enter the property immediately. But legal rights and emotional readiness are not the same lumber, and I have learned that forcing a joint before the glue sets only guarantees it will fail when the weight comes. I went back on a Monday. December had settled over Asheville the way it always does, quiet and gray, the trees bare except for the pines that held their green like a promise they refused to break. I drove the 22 minutes from the cabin to Chestnut Ridge Road with the windows up and the radio off, the folder on the passenger seat out of habit even though it had already done its work. Vanessa's white SUV was gone. Danny had told me she moved out the Saturday after the ruling, taking her clothes, her laptop, and a suitcase Lily had helped her pack. Danny stayed at the house to keep it occupied until I returned. He had texted me that morning, a single line. "House is ready." I cleaned what I could. I parked in the driveway for the first time in weeks. The bluestone path I had laid 20 years ago was covered in wet leaves, but beneath them the stones were still level, still fitted, still doing what I had built them to do. I walked to the front door and put my key in the lock. It turned without resistance. Such a small motion for such a large return. Inside, the house smelled different. Not bad, just different. The way a room smells when it has been occupied by people who use different soap, different detergent, who cook different meals, and carry different weather in on their shoes. June's scent was gone. I had expected that, had prepared myself for it on the drive, but expectation and experience are two boards cut from the same tree that never quite match when you lay them side by side. The living room had been rearranged. The couch was against the wrong wall. June's reading chair, the green one with the ottoman she had reupholstered herself, was missing. In its place stood a gray sectional I had never seen, angular and modern, the kind of furniture that looks expensive in a catalog and uncomfortable in a home. I would move it out by the weekend. I walked through the kitchen. The countertops were clean, but the small things were wrong. June's ceramic rooster was not on the windowsill. The wooden spice rack I had built to fit the space between the cabinet and the wall had been replaced by a metal one from a department store. The refrigerator held unfamiliar condiments and a carton of almond milk that June would have found personally offensive. Danny was in the backyard, sitting on the steps that led down to the garden. He held a mug of coffee and stared at the raised beds where June had grown tomatoes, basil, and the roses she talked to when she thought no one was listening. The beds were overgrown now, weeds tangled through the wire cages, the rose bushes unpruned and leggy, reaching in directions that had no purpose. I sat beside him. The wood of the steps was soft in places, beginning to rot where the rain collected along the edge. I would need to replace 3 boards, maybe 4. I noted it the way I note everything that needs fixing. Automatically. The way a doctor notices a limp or a mechanic hears a knock in an engine. My mind has always cataloged, repairs the way other people catalog worries. "Where is June's reading chair?" I asked. Danny set down his mug. Vanessa donated it to Goodwill about 6 months ago. She said it didn't match the new furniture. I absorbed that the way wood absorbs a stain, slowly, the color spreading through the grain until it becomes part of the material itself. June's chair. The one she sat in every evening with a book and a cup of tea, that she never finished because she always fell asleep by the 3rd chapter. The one I had carried into the house the day we moved in, angling it through the doorway while she directed me with hand signals like a ground crew guiding a plane. Gone to a thrift store shelf somewhere, tagged with a price that measured its value in dollars rather than decades. "I'll find it," Danny said quietly. "I'll check every Goodwill in the county if I have to." I did not respond to that. Instead, I looked at the garden and tried to see it the way June would have seen it. Not as a mess, but as a project. Not as loss, but as a starting point. She had always said that a garden does not die. It just waits. The roots were still there beneath the weeds, the roses still alive beneath the wild growth. All they needed was someone willing to kneel in the dirt and do the slow, unglamorous work of cutting back what did not belong so that what did could breathe again. I stood and walked to the workshop. The door was padlocked. Danny had put the lock on after Vanessa left, at Harold's suggestion. I opened it with the key Danny had given me and stepped inside. Everything was where I had left it. The lathe. The bandsaw. Crumb. The rows of chisels and planes hung on the pegboard wall in the order I had established 30 years ago, largest to smallest, most used to least used, each tool in its silhouette like a shadow that had learned to wait. The sawdust smell hit me the way memory hits, suddenly, completely, bypassing the mind and going straight to the place where the body stores the things it refuses to forget. I ran my hand along the workbench. The surface was smooth from years of use, the maple worn to a honey color that no finish could replicate because it was made of time, not lacquer. On the bench sat a half-finished rocking chair. I had started it the week before June's last hospital stay, intending it as a gift for the porch at the cabin. The seat was shaped, the legs turned, the spindles cut but not yet fitted. It had waited here for 2 years. Patient the way only wood can be patient, holding its shape without complaint, ready to become what it was meant to be whenever the builder returned. I picked up a spindle and held it to the light. It was straight. The grain ran clean, from end to end. I set it back on the bench and looked around the room at the tools, the wood, the accumulated order of a life spent making things that last. "All right," I said to no one. "Let's get back to work." I started with the porch steps. 3 boards rotted along the rain edge, just as I had noted the day I came back. I pulled them out on a Tuesday morning with a pry bar and a patience I had not felt in months, working the nails loose slowly so the surrounding wood would not split. The old boards came out soft and dark, crumbling at the ends where the moisture had lived longest. I replaced them with white oak, cut to the same dimensions, planed smooth, the grain running lengthwise so the water would travel off rather than soak in. It took 4 hours. When I finished, the 3 new boards sat pale against the weathered gray of the originals, conspicuous, the way all new things are conspicuous in an old setting, but they were level, and they were sound, and in a year the sun would gray them to match. Danny came by after work most evenings. He did not move back in. He had rented a small apartment on Marymount Avenue, 2 rooms above a barber shop, and he seemed to need the distance the way a young tree needs space from the canopy above it to find its own light. But he came, and he helped. We rehung the kitchen cabinets that Vanessa had replaced with open shelving. We moved the gray sectional to the garage and brought in a sofa from the Habitat Restore that was not June's green chair, but was at least a thing chosen by hands that remembered what this room was supposed to feel like. Danny found June's ceramic rooster at a flea market on Sweeten Creek Road. Not the original, but close enough that it earned its place on the windowsill without apology. Lily came on weekends. The custody hearing was still pending, but Vanessa had agreed through her attorneys to a temporary visitation schedule, Fridays after school through Sunday evening. I suspect she agreed because fighting it would have weakened her position in the financial restitution case, but I did not care about her reasons. I cared about the sound of Lily's shoes on the bluestone path and the way she ran through the front door without knocking because she had never learned to knock on a door she considered hers. The first Saturday, she stood in the living room and looked around with the critical eye of a 7-year-old who notices everything and forgives nothing. "Where's the gray couch?" she asked. "Gonna." "Good." It was scratchy. She walked to the windowsill and touched the ceramic rooster. "This isn't Grandma's rooster. Grandma's had a chip on his beak." "You're right. This one is his cousin." She considered that. "Okay," she said, and carried her backpack to the room that had been hers since she was born, the one I had painted lavender when June was pregnant with the idea of a grandchild and wanted the room ready 2 years before Lily arrived. I took her to the workshop that afternoon. She had been there before, many times, but always with June supervising, making sure small fingers stayed away from sharp edges. Now it was just the 2 of us. I set her on a stool beside the workbench and showed her the half-finished rocking chair. "Who is it for?" she asked. "It was going to be for Grandma." For the cabin porch, Lily touched one of the spindles, running her finger along the grain the way I had taught her, without realizing I was teaching. Can it be for me instead? Something opened in my chest that had been closed so long I had forgotten it was a door. Yes, I said. It can be for you. We worked on it together. I let her sand the spindles with fine grit paper, showing her how to follow the grain, always with it. Never against. Because going against the grain tears the fibers and leaves marks that no finish can hide. She sanded with the seriousness of a child who understands she has been trusted with something real. Her small hands moving in steady strokes, sawdust collecting on her jeans like gold dust on a miner's pants. While she sanded, I fitted the spindles into the seat, drilling the holes with a brace and bit rather than the electric drill, because I wanted her to hear the quiet sound of hand tools, the whisper of the auger turning through maple, a sound that belongs to a slower world, a world where things are made one at a time, by people who are not in a hurry to be finished. By the end of the afternoon, the chair was half assembled, the back taking shape, the rockers still waiting on the wall rack for their turn. Lily swept the floor with a broom taller than she was, pushing the sawdust into a pile with the determination of someone who believes that cleaning is as important as building. June had believed that too. That evening I made dinner in the kitchen. Spaghetti with the sauce June used to make from the tomatoes in the garden, except the garden had no tomatoes yet. So I used canned ones from the store, and added extra garlic the way June said you should when the tomatoes have no story of their own. Lily sat at the table and told me about school, about her friend Maya who could do a cartwheel with her eyes closed, about the book they were reading in class, about a dog who walked across an entire state to find his family. "Grandpa," she said between bites, "are you going to stay here now?" "Yes." "Promise?" "Promise." She nodded and returned to her spaghetti with the satisfaction of a person who has received the only answer that mattered. After dinner, she fell asleep on the new sofa with her head on a pillow and her socks mismatched. One pink and one white. And I covered her with the quilt June had made from old flannel shirts, the one with the squares of plaid in every shade of blue, because June said blue was the color of things that last. I sat in the kitchen after Lily was asleep and listened to the house. It was not quiet the way the cabin was quiet, with the lake and the wind and the absence of everything. This quiet had texture. The refrigerator hummed, the furnace ticked. Somewhere upstairs a pipe settled with a sound like a knuckle cracking. These were the sounds of a house being lived in, a house doing its job, holding warmth inside while the cold pressed against the windows and the mountains outside stood patient and dark and impossibly old. I opened June's ledger to a blank page near the back. I had not written in it before. It felt presumptuous to add my handwriting to hers, like painting over a mural, but the page was blank, and the pen was in my hand. And June had always said that a blank page is not empty, it is waiting. I wrote, December 14. Lily sanded the spindles today. She follows the grain without being told twice. The chair will be finished by Christmas. The house is not what it was. It is becoming what it will be. The idea came from Lily, though she did not know it. The second Saturday she came to the workshop, she brought her friend Maya, the girl who could do cartwheels with her eyes closed. Maya stood in the doorway and stared at the tools on the pegboard wall, the way a child stares at a museum exhibit, with the careful distance of someone who has been taught that touching is not allowed. "You can come in," I said. She stepped inside slowly, her sneakers leaving small prints in the sawdust. She touched the handle of a claw hammer and looked at me as though expecting to be told to stop. "Have you ever used one?" I asked. "My mom doesn't have tools," Maya said. "When something breaks, she calls the landlord, and he comes in 2 weeks, or he doesn't come." That sentence stayed with me the way sawdust stays in the creases of your palms even after you wash them, hidden in the lines, impossible to remove completely. Maya's mother did not have tools. The landlord came in 2 weeks, or did not come, and somewhere in that gap between the breaking and the fixing, a woman and her daughter lived with whatever was broken and learned to call it normal. I taught Maya to hammer a nail that afternoon. I held the block of scrap pine steady and let her drive a 10-penny nail through it with 3 strikes, the last one flush. She looked at the nail head sitting level with the surface, and her face did something I recognized, the expression of a person who has just discovered that her hands can change the shape of the world. Lily had the same expression when she sanded her first spindle. June had it the morning she pulled the dented copper weather vane off the garage roof and straightened it with a rubber mallet and a piece of railroad track she used as an anvil. That night, after Danny picked up Lily and Maya's mother collected her from the driveway with a wave and a thank you shouted through the car window, I sat at the kitchen table with June's ledger open to the page where she had written her notes about Vanessa's early days at the workshop. V has good hands, June had written. Patient. Learns by watching. Needs someone to show her the first cut. And then she finds the rest on her own. June had seen something in Vanessa that I had missed. A hunger for competence. For the dignity that comes from knowing how to fix what is broken in your own life without waiting for someone else to arrive. Vanessa had betrayed that gift. But the gift itself was not wrong. The instinct to teach, to open a door and let someone walk through it with a tool in their hand and the knowledge to use it. That instinct was June's finest architecture, and it did not deserve to die because one student had failed the lesson. I called Pastor Tom the next morning. He answered on the second ring, as though he had been expecting the call, which with Pastor Tom was always possible because he treated every conversation as an appointment God had already scheduled. I want to start a program, I said. At the workshop. A class for women in the community who need basic home repair skills. Plumbing, they can handle themselves. Electrical safety, how to fix a leaking faucet. Replace a broken step. Hang a door that sticks. The things that cost $200 when you call a contractor, but cost $12 in an afternoon when you know how to do them yourself. Pastor Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, June would have called it something with a pun. June would have called it nailed it. He laughed. A warm, rolling sound like a barrel going down a gentle hill. She absolutely would have. When do you want to start? January. I need to organize the workshop, build some extra benches, and put together a curriculum. I was thinking 8 sessions, Saturday mornings, 2 hours each, basic tools, basic repairs, basic confidence. I can help with outreach. The church has a women's group that meets Wednesdays. Darla May knows every single mother within 15 miles. Between the two of us, we can fill your workshop in a week. I spent the rest of December preparing. I built 4 new workbenches from pine and plywood, simple and sturdy. Each one sized for someone who had never stood at a workbench before. I organized the tool wall into stations. Hammers and nails, screwdrivers and hinges, wrenches and pipe fittings, saws and measuring tapes. I wrote lesson plans on index cards in block letters, the way my father had taught me when I apprenticed under him at 16. Each card listing the task, the tools, the steps, and the most common mistake. Because knowing where people fail is more useful than knowing where they succeed. Darla May spread the word. Within 10 days, I had 14 names on a list taped to the workshop door. Women from the church, women from the diner, women Pastor Tom knew from the food pantry and the shelter on Patton Avenue. Maya's mother, whose name was Lila, signed up first and wrote beside her name in parentheses, I don't even own a screwdriver. On New Year's Day, I stood in the workshop alone, the benches arranged in a half circle, the tools laid out, the index cards stacked on my bench, the space heater humming in the corner. Through the window I could see the garden where June's roses waited beneath the winter soil, dormant but alive, holding their roots in the dark the way faith holds a person who has forgotten what the sun looks like. Lily's rocking chair sat finished in the corner. I had attached the rockers on Christmas morning while she watched, and she had tested it immediately. Rocking so hard the chair walked across the floor and bumped the wall. She laughed and said, Grandpa, it moves by itself. And I said, everything I build has a little bit of your grandma in it. She never could sit still. I turned off the space heater, locked the workshop, and walked to the house. On the porch I stopped and looked at the 3 new boards in the steps. still paler than the rest, still announcing themselves as repairs. By spring, they would blend in. By summer, no one would remember they had ever been replaced. That is the nature of restoration. It is not about erasing what happened. It is about making what remains strong enough to carry what comes next. The first class was in 6 days. 14 women would walk through a door that had only ever opened for me and June, and the few people we trusted with our tools and our time. I did not know if the program would work. I did not know if I was a teacher. But I knew how to show someone the first cut and let them find the rest on their own. Because that is what June did for Vanessa, before Vanessa forgot what the lesson was for, and it is what June did for me every single day of our marriage, standing beside me, handing me the right tool at the right moment, believing I could build something worth keeping, even when I was not sure myself. They arrived in 1s and 2s, parking along the gravel shoulder of Chestnut Ridge Road because the driveway only held 4 cars, and I had not thought to plan for 14. Some came in work clothes, jeans and boots, as though they expected to crawl under a house by noon. Others came in church clothes, because Saturday morning and Darla May's invitation carried the same weight as a summons from the pulpit. Lila, Maya's mother, arrived 10 minutes early in a sweatshirt that read Asheville Running Club and sneakers that had never been used for running. She carried a notebook and a pen, the preparation of a woman who intended to write down everything and forget nothing. I stood at my bench at the front of the half circle and waited until all 14 had found their stations. The space heater hummed. The tools lay arranged on each bench in the order I had planned. A claw hammer, a tape measure, a flathead screwdriver, a Phillips head, a small level, and a box of 10 penny nails. Basic instruments. The alphabet of repair. My name is Bobby Callahan, I said. I have been a carpenter for 46 years. My wife June and I built this workshop together. She's gone now. But this program was her idea. Even though she never said it out loud, she just lived it. Every day. By fixing what was broken and teaching anyone who was willing to learn. The room was quiet. 14 women looked at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism, to the guarded hope of people who have been promised things before and learned to hold their expectations at arm's length. Today we start with the hammer, I said. Not because it's the simplest tool, but because it's the most honest. A hammer does exactly what you tell it to. If you miss the nail, the hammer didn't fail. Your aim did. And aim can be taught. I demonstrated the grip first. Handle at the base, not the middle, because choking up reduces power and control simultaneously, a fact that applies to hammers and to most things in life. I showed them the swing. Elbow as the hinge, wrist loose, eyes on the nail head, not the hammer face. I drove a nail into a pine block in 2 strikes. The sound rang through the workshop the way a bell rings through a church. Singular and clear. Then I walked them through it one at a time. Lila went first. She held the hammer the way someone holds a tennis racket for the first time, tight and high and uncertain. I adjusted her grip without touching her hand, placing my own on the bench beside hers and showing the position. She swung. The nail bent sideways on the first strike. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has just confirmed her worst suspicion about herself. Pull it out, I said. Use the claw. Hook it under the head and lever it against the wood. The same tool that drives the nail removes the mistake. That is the first lesson. She pulled the nail, straightened it against the bench with 3 taps, repositioned it, and swung again. This time, the nail went in crooked but deep. The third attempt went straight. Lila stared at the nail head sitting flush with the surface and said nothing. But her jaw did something I recognized from Maya, from Lily, from June, from every person who has ever discovered that failure is not a wall, but a door you have to walk through more than once. I moved through the stations. A woman named Teresa, who worked the night shift at Mission Hospital, drove her first nail in a single strike and laughed so loudly the women at the next bench jumped. A grandmother named Ruth, who told me she had raised 5 children in a house with a kitchen faucet that had leaked for 11 years, asked me if I could teach her to fix the faucet today. I told her that was session 4 and she said, "I've waited 11 years. I can wait 3 more Saturdays." By the end of the 2 hours, every woman had driven at least 5 nails and pulled at least 2. The pine blocks were pocked with holes and bent nails, and the evidence of 30 hands learning what they could do. The sawdust on the floor had been mixed with boot prints of every size. The air smelled of pine sap and the particular warmth that comes from a room full of people concentrating on the same small task with the same large hope. As they filed out, Lila stopped at my bench. She held her notebook open to a page filled with notes in tight handwriting. Diagrams of hammer grips, arrows indicating swing direction, and at the bottom, underlined twice, the same tool that drives the nail removes the mistake. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "Maya told me about the nail she hammered last month. She's been talking about it every day since. She drew a picture of it for school. Her teacher called me and asked why my daughter drew a nail for her art project. What did you tell her?" I told her it was the first thing Maya ever built. Lila closed the notebook. "Thank you. I'll be here next Saturday." After everyone left, Danny helped me sweep the workshop. He had watched the class from the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, and I had seen him smile twice, once when Teresa hit her nail, and once when Ruth made her joke about the faucet. He did not say much while we swept. He did not need to. The broom moved across the floor, and the sawdust gathered into a pile, and the silence between us was the kind of silence that builds things rather than the kind that tears them down. That evening Harold called. His voice had the careful weight I had learned to associate with news that required sitting down. "The custody hearing is scheduled," he said. "January 28th. Judge Voss again." I leaned against the kitchen counter. Through the window I could see the workshop, its lights off now, the door closed, the tools resting on their hooks like instruments after a concert, still vibrating with the memory of the music they had made. "There's something else," Harold said. "Vanessa's attorneys have filed a motion. She's requesting joint custody of Lily. And Bobby, she's submitted a character reference from a women's shelter in Charlotte, where she's been volunteering since she left Asheville." I set the phone on the counter and looked at the ledger on the kitchen table, open to the page where I had written about Lily sanding the spindles. Beside it, June's red ink warning still marked the power of attorney page, like a scar that had healed but never faded. Vanessa was building something too. I did not yet know whether it was a wall or a bridge, but I knew it was deliberate, and I knew that the woman who had forged my signature and emptied my accounts was not a woman who did anything without a plan. January 28th came cold and bright. The kind of winter morning where the air hurts your lungs and the sky is so clear you can see the spine of every ridge from Pack Square to the Tennessee line. I wore the borrowed suit again. Harold had offered to get it dry cleaned, but I declined because the wrinkles felt honest, and I had spent enough of the past 3 months surrounded by things that pretended to be what they were not. The courtroom was the same. Same fluorescent hum. Same flag in the corner. Same nameplate. Honorable Catherine Voss. But the feeling was different. The first hearing had been about property, documents and dollars, proving what belonged to whom. This one was about a 7-year-old girl who drew pictures of nails in art class and rocked her chair so hard it walked across the floor, and the question was not who owned her, but who could hold her steady while she grew. Vanessa sat at the opposite table. She looked different. Not the composed board meeting appearance from December, but something quieter, reduced, the way wood looks after you strip the varnish and expose the raw grain underneath. She wore a dark blue dress and no jewelry. Her attorney sat beside her with a thinner portfolio than before. Harold presented our petition first. Stable home, financial security, emotional consistency. He entered visitation logs, workshop time, meals, routine. He submitted a letter from Lily's school counselor, noting improved attendance and a drawing titled, "My Family," in which the tallest figure held a hammer, the middle one held a book, and the smallest held a cat we did not own. Vanessa's attorney presented the joint custody motion. Volunteer work at a Charlotte shelter. 3 days a week for 6 weeks. helping women with housing applications. A character reference calling Vanessa dedicated and consistent. The argument that separating a mother from her child served no one's interest, and that a joint arrangement would give Lily 2 homes rather than the loss of one parent. Judge Voss asked Vanessa to speak. She stood with her palms flat on the table, pressing against the surface for balance. Your Honor, I did things I am ashamed of. I took money that was not mine. I forged documents. I manipulated my husband and disrespected his father in ways I cannot undo. She paused. Her voice thinned the way a board thins when you plane it past the point of comfort. I am here because Lily is my daughter and I love her. And I believe that love, even love that has made terrible mistakes, deserves the chance to prove it can be better. Judge Voss asked me to speak. I stood and looked at the bench and the flag and the woman across the aisle who had slapped me at a Thanksgiving dinner that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Your Honor, I am a carpenter. I have spent my life fixing things that are broken. Some breaks are clean, and you glue them, and the joint is stronger than the original. Some breaks shatter the grain, and the piece cannot be saved. I have thought about which kind of break this is, and I do not have a certain answer. I looked at Vanessa. In her face I saw something I had not expected. Not strategic composure or rehearsed remorse, but a raw and exhausted honesty that reminded me of the girl who had walked into my workshop with a portfolio too big for her arms. What I know is that Lily needs people who will show up. Not once, not for 6 weeks, but every day. In the ordinary way that matters most. I have been that person, and I will continue to be. If Vanessa can become that person again, then Lily deserves to have her mother. But I ask this court to ensure there are safeguards. Because trust, once broken, must be rebuilt the way you rebuild a load-bearing wall. Slowly, with inspections at every stage, and with the understanding that the structure cannot carry weight until the work is proven sound. Judge Voss deliberated for 40 minutes. She awarded primary custody to me with structured visitation for Vanessa, supervised for 6 months, transitioning to unsupervised if compliance was maintained. She ordered financial restitution on a negotiated schedule. She told Vanessa the court recognized her efforts and would review the arrangement in 1 year. Vanessa gathered her things and walked toward the door. As she passed my table, she stopped. I expected something calculated. Instead, she said, "The workshop class. Lila told me about it. June would have been proud." She left before I could respond. The door closed, and I sat with Harold's hand on my arm and the feeling that something had ended and something else had begun in the same breath. The way a tree drops its last autumn leaf, and the bud for spring is already forming on the same branch. Invisible but certain, Danny drove me home. The mountains were blue and sharp, and the road curved through the valley past the orchard, and the stone church and the creek, where the guardrail had never been fixed. When we pulled into the driveway, Lily was waiting on the porch in her winter coat, sitting in her rocking chair. Rocking so gently the chair did not walk at all. "Grandpa," she said. I waited. "I know, sweetheart." She took my hand and led me inside. The house smelled of spaghetti Danny had started before we left. Garlic and tomatoes filling the kitchen with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. June's ledger sat on the table, closed, its leather cover smooth and patient. After dinner, I went to the workshop alone. The benches stood in their half-circle. The tools hung on their hooks. The sawdust from Saturday's class still dusted the corners. I sat at my bench and ran my hand along the maple surface, feeling the grain under my palm, the history of every cut and scratch and stain, the accumulated evidence of a life spent making things that hold. I opened the ledger to the next blank page and wrote, January 28. The court gave me Lily. The workshop has 22 names on the list now. Danny comes every evening. The porch steps have started to gray. The grain runs true. I closed the ledger, turned off the lamp, and walked back to the house where the lights were on, and my granddaughter was asleep on the sofa under her grandmother's quilt, and the mountains outside stood in the dark the way they have always stood, patient and immovable, holding the sky up so the rest of us have room to build beneath it.